Looks like we still have some friends here attending. Good to see you all. Well, we have a lot of great content for you today. So we will get started in just a few seconds here. But go ahead and put your info in the chat and we'll get this going. So today we're going to talk about funding kinship programs and services. And we're going to give you some tips and we're going to give you some resources. And so pleased today to be joined by three amazing experts on this in this area. Anita Rogers, Stephen Olander, and Tiffany Allen, who you will meet shortly. Just to tell you a little bit about the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network on the next slide, you'll see kind of who we are and when we got started. So we were awarded a cooperative agreement from the U.S. Administration for Community Living, which is the aging and disability arm of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, to work with the array of systems that impact kinship families. So this isn't just a child welfare issue of families. This isn't just aging families. These are families that intersect with the array of systems that any family intersects with, really. So just elevating the need for them to work cross systems and together and consider these families in their services and supports. So we don't help the families directly because local communities do that best. As you all know, programs, laws, everything varies so much based on your community. But what we do is elevate promising practices, exemplary kinship programs. We provide technical assistance, connect you with your peers, and just kind of share learning around the country so that you can better support the families. And that's what we're doing today, is sharing some best learning around funding. Next slide, please. Just a few of the things that we do to help is these webinars. We have learning communities, learning collaboratives. We also respond to any level of individual request for assistance. By that, I mean, if you are a grandma driving around with diapers in your trunk, helping other grandmas and want to start a nonprofit, we will help you. If you are a large child welfare agency and need information on the final rule allowing for separate licensing standards, we will help you. So feel free to reach out. It's the top right box on the home page. You'll see a form and we will get back to you. And that's on our website, which you'll see there linked. Next slide, please. This will give you kind of an image of our website. This is the home page, and that's the request assistance button up there on the top right, which you'll press to complete a short form, and we will get back with you. Next slide, please, Ro. Please stay connected with us. We have a monthly newsletter. We're not going to spam your inbox, but you will get a real plethora of kinship resources from around the country, from our partners. We have 5 national partners. We have a whole array of subject matter experts. So it will be a lot of resources, grant opportunities, and the like. And also follow us on LinkedIn, because we only send out the newsletter once a month, but LinkedIn we post very multiple times a week. So you will get the latest Census Bureau poster on American Indian and Alaska Native children, for example, by following us on LinkedIn. The next slide is just our disclaimer statement to let you know where our funding comes from, and all of our services and resources are free of charge and in the public domain. And then now it's my pleasure on the next slide to introduce you to our speakers. So Anita Rogers, who is a senior fellow here at Generations United, which is our mother organization, I guess is the phrase. Stephen Olander, who's one of our subject matter experts and really is a wealth of knowledge on all things federal financing and child welfare and the like. So you'll enjoy hearing from him. And Tiffany Allen, who has her own consulting firm to help small nonprofits. And you'll see the name there. So it's my pleasure now to turn it over to Anita Rogers. Anita.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the trends and what's going on currently. I do a lot of grant writing. So let's start with fund development. And as all of you probably know, it's very competitive in this field. And you need strategies to secure funds and tools to solicit the funding. And as we go through this, as Stephen and Tiffany will even expand on that. But fund development is an ongoing strategic positioning of an organization to sustain itself. So I ask everyone, if you haven't thought about it, if you don't have it, think about developing a development plan, listing all the things that you can possibly do to meet the needs you have and who can be those persons or agencies who can help you meet those needs. So I encourage you all to do a fund development plan. Next slide. So there are stages of fund development. The first one is cultivation, identifying and building relationships with potential donors. Who are those people? Who are those agencies? Who are those entities can make a difference for you that you can tell them about who you are, what you're doing, who you're serving, and they care about it. The second stage is solicitation, participating in one-to-one outreach to whether personal, direct mail, or telephone. Solicitation, do not wait for someone to come to you. You can go to them. You can make an appointment with a foundation to say, I want to discuss something that you have, or where United Way gives away money. The government entities give away money. You can make an appointment with them to discuss it because you want your name on their radar. You want them to know you because money is also very personal. The last one is stewardship, thanking the donors through letters, recognition activities. If you decide to have banners put up for everyone who gives you X amount of money, different banners for different sizes. So find ways to acknowledge your donors. Next slide. So there's some particular funding trends this year, as I've been really noticing through all the grants I've been writing. Behavioral health is big. And of course, in our kinship care programs, behavioral health is a major issue. And sometimes our children are in kinship care because of the substance use of their children, because of the opioid crisis. And a lot of both federal and foundation and government funding is looking at behavioral health, substance use disorder, and opioid crisis. Of course, there's health disparities. And as you know, if a family is poor, the health disparities are exacerbated. Early childhood education, youth programs, violence prevention. As you know, the CDC just declared violence as a health issue just a couple of days ago, if not today. And so when they declare something as an issue, there is usually money that follows that. Unsheltered, which is the term now that they use instead of homeless people, unsheltered. Immigrant support, food insecurity. There's a fair amount of money, especially with foundations around food insecurity. Digital inclusion, which sometimes goes hand in hand with health disparities, with general disparities. Technology and innovations. How can we get access? How can our families get access to the tools they need to become involved in the day-to-day operations and access the resources they need? Race and gender equity, economic mobility, and cultural heritage preservation. It's interesting under cultural heritage preservation, it's the National Institute of, not National Institute of Art, I forget, the National Endowment for Art has initiatives just looking at cultural heritage. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation looks at stuff on cultural heritage. Next slide. So there are funding interests and there are funding trends. So as you cultivate your agencies or who you plan to pursue, think about making it personalized to them. Find out who they are, what they're about, find out their backstories, and personalize that letter that you send to them or when you meet with them. Talk about the things that they're interested in. Of course, there's digital fundraising platforms. Artificial intelligence is everywhere and everything all the time. It's an interesting thing. There's a generational leadership shift and it's noticeable as younger generations take on nonprofit leadership roles. Now, when we say that, it's also imperative as like an older person like myself, as the younger generations take on leadership roles, we also need to be able to coach and mentor those. So it's not one or the other. It's that intergenerational leadership that we should be promoting that is also very helpful to all of us. Impact investing connects financial returns with measurable social or environmental benefits. I'm sure you've heard of return on investments, ROIs. Some of them are asking, and if I do this, how much will this save here? And how will this help the government? How would this help the families? How would this reduce the impact in that community? Sometimes they call it the cost benefit ratio. These are words that they use, but they want to, you can't just say, well, we're going to do this and I know it's going to be good. So what is the impact? What is the actual quantitative impact, not just the qualitative impact? Next slide. So there's some more funding interest. The one that particularly resonates for me is the storytelling and video marketing, given that so many of our families have stories to tell. So we have videos that we can put. There's storytelling to showcase the human impact of your work. So sometimes if you're sending something, send like a 2 or 3 video in your letter that they can put the link and they can see these actual people, not just you, real life people who are experiencing the kind of services you need, and they're identifying the needs that they have. Virtual and hybrid events. More and more, it's not just Zoom or in person. You can either join by in Zoom or in person. So think about that as well. And of course, donors want you to focus on their data security and their privacy. And last on this interest is sustainability. The circular philanthropy. If we do this, if we give you 2 years of this, and we give you $100,000 to do X, and you started a program, how will you sustain and maintain that program after it's over? You cannot just say, well, we will solicit funds. That's when that development plan comes in very helpful. That's when your sustainability plan comes in very helpful. That's when your strategic plan comes in very helpful, because more and more agencies, foundations are asking, what is your strategic plan for your agency, the services you provide? So these are things you need to be thinking about and have ready and have prepared in your arsenal to solicit funds. Next. Partnerships are really important. If you're a small nonprofit and say your budget is $100,000 a year, think about who you can partner with, a larger entity, be it a university or a government entity, that you could be a subcontractor in. When I was at Temple University, we actually did a program. We got the money for the program, but we were not the best people to get the money for the program because the outreach component really relied in the community. And so the people who should have been the subcontractor or be very visible part of the proposal we wrote were community-based agencies. So think about that, because that's how you begin to leverage your dollars. That's how you begin to build your repertoire of who you are and what you are. And you're not responsible for the cash flow, which sometimes is an issue. If you're a small organization, they want you to start from day one, but they don't give you the money for 3 months. So strategic partners can improve outreach efforts and expand advocacy, enhance program services. And Stephen's going to be talking about one. I just want to give you a sample. I'm doing a grant now in HRSA. That's Health Resources Services Administration. Year 1, they're giving $600,000, and year 2, they're giving $500,000. Their priority is on behavioral health with unserved populations. In that proposal, one of my targeted entities in that proposal are youth in kinship care families. And so this large entity, I'm working for a federally qualified health center, is going to be subcontracting with a community-based kinship care agency to do the outreach and engagement of kinship care families. So strategic partners are very important. Next. So the biggest source of giving is individual. We spend a lot of time writing proposals, but sometimes we need to spend more time in cultivating and finding who are those individual donors. And some of those individual donors have stories like, I mean, Oprah was raised by her grandmom, I believe, but she raised in kinship care. A lot of notables are raised by their were raised in kinship care. So think about individual campaigns, annual campaigns, donor option campaigns. Then there's federated giving. A federated giving would be like United Way or the Black United Fund. These are entities who collect money and then they distribute it to other places. And of course, don't forget about the civil social services, whether it's sororities, fraternities, the Elks, the Masons, all of those entities are places that have a community charity notion or focus that they want to give money to entities that make a difference for their community. Bequests. Given that a lot of in our kinship care community, there are older adults, and there are older adults who have money, and there are older adults who don't have money, and there are people who have money who want to help other people. But think about connecting with some law firms that may be able to help connect you to some of those bequests. And of course, the annual signature event, the chicken event where you get everybody gets chicken on their plate and some string beans and some rice. But there are other events you can think of, and think of some interesting, more innovative ones that are something that you do annually. And you need to make it an annual event if you can, because if a funding agent knows that you're doing this and they like what you did the first year, they'll put it in their budget as a line item. So we need to fund the Kinship Caregiver Initiative next year, and we'll put X amount of money in our fund. And I always look for my annual signature event. I always look for, if I can, a corporate chair who does not have to do anything, but just call his people or call her people and say, I need money for this and don't make me look badly. Next slide. So we talked about government sources, city, state, and federal. The city, for instance, I have written RFPs for cities and states and federal. But it's important that look at all those sources and see where they are. And if the mayor, for instance, in Philadelphia, the mayor has changed, they changed their focus. So you need to be very clear about what the priorities are in your state, in your city, and what are the new priorities in the federal government. Foundations, if you can focus on family, youth, and older adult support, but also all those other entities, behavioral health, violence prevention, all of those are important. And corporations with human interests. And you could use corporations. Sometimes you can get in-kind support from corporations. I have been able to get free printing from agencies, from corporations that have their own printing press. So they have printed all my brochures. They have printed all my newsletters. So think about other ways you can get money. It's not always just delivery of the service, but it's also the stuff that does not, you won't have to take that money out of your regular operating budget to make it happen. And clearly unions, the media, and banks. Next. So these are some, every day I must get about 50 or so RFP or request for proposals or notification of funding. And these are some of my main sources. Of course, the Child Welfare Information Gateway is a lot on child welfare, kinship care, and issues relating to families. Generations This Week has a whole section in their newsletter. If you haven't subscribed, you must subscribe. So is the Network Connection under the National Technical Assistance Center, a lot of funding opportunities. But I also registered for Google Alert. And I registered for Google Alert and say if I want money on behavioral health funding. If you register for Google Alert, be very specific, say what you're looking for. And then every day, you will get notification of money or funding for that. You will get notification every day. Trust me, I get notifications on about 20 different topics every day. And of course, grants.gov is for that government funding, but grants.gov also features foundation funding, not just government funding. And the Philanthropy News Digest publishes RFPs on multiple nonprofit topics. And again, these are free entities. You don't have to pay any money to get access to these resources, but they're great RFPs, giving you the notification, and it gives you the link to the full proposal. Next. And I had the opportunity to work with the Technical Assistance Center, the National Technical Assistance Center for Grandparents, to develop a funding toolkit. And in that toolkit, and you will have access to that, there's a whole proposal template. I implore people, don't wait till a RFP, request for proposal, comes up to start writing something. Have your generic template already in place. Have all your statistics, current statistics already in place. Have your data in place. Have your, if you can, any of the letters of support or MOUs in place. Think about, have your budget in place. Have your awards in place. Have your needs assessment of why you need to do this in place. So this particular toolkit allows you to do this. This toolkit also directs you to some key national, who also have some local entities that could be partners for you as you begin to solicit money. Next. And now it is with great pleasure that I introduce Stephen Allender. Steve.
Hi, everyone. So I first want to thank you, Anita, and thank you to the network for producing these slides. I just gave words and they created this beautiful, I think, wonderful image of money being shaken out of Congress. And that is what we want to talk about a little bit here. It's the federal funding sources for kinship programs and services. We can go to the thing. So the thinking that I come into this with, and that I hope you'll come into this with, is the fact that every single issue is a kin issue, and every single issue deserves a kin solution. When people think about federal funding for kinship care, they are generally thinking about things that are more traditional sources that are focused on child welfare or on older Americans. Things like Title IV-B of the Social Security Act that funds kinship navigators and other kinship programs, or things like the National Family Caregiver Support Program. And those are really important programs, but there are also many other federal programs that aren't perfectly dedicated to kinship care or to foster care, but that impact kin. And those programs should be thought of as programs, as funding programs for kinship. And sometimes they are, and we're seeing that happen more, and we'd like to see even more of that. Because if we think about it, the problems impacting kin are a microcosm of much larger problems out there. Any issue that is affecting children and families is impacting kin families, and it's impacting kin families in a unique way. Looking at some of the funding trends that Anita shared, behavioral health, substance use and opioids, early childhood education, housing, digital inclusion, health disparities, and food insecurity. Every single one of those impacts kin, and every single one of them impacts kin in unique ways. And so to properly address those issues fully, there need to be programs that are tailored to address the ways that they're impacting kin. So I'm going to start by talking briefly through 3 federal funding sources that have been used to support kin. There are many more, but 3 that go beyond the normal ones we think of as child welfare and older American programs. We can go to the next slide. The first one that I want to start with is one that feels a little bit closer to what people think of as being our work, and that's the Community Services Block Grant. This is a block grant that it provides flexible funding to states, territories, and tribes to address the causes and conditions of poverty. That money is distributed to the states, territories, and tribes, who then distribute it to a network of community action agencies. And those agencies either do direct services with kin families or with families, or partner with other community-based organizations to deliver a wide range of services. And that is everything from emergency shelter to college readiness programs, tax preparation, peer support programs, direct help with rent or utilities or home repairs. In every community, the way that CSBG funds are spent looks different because those services are meant to be tailored to the distinct needs of that individual community. And the reason I bring this one up is because it's used for kinship care. There was one program in Michigan that worked with their community action agency to get funding from CSBG to offer a special program for kin caregivers, because they went through and identified kin as a specific program needing supports that CSBG offers. And they created a program that offers in-person and virtual support groups to help build community for kin and to help navigate complex issues for kinship care so that people weren't going through those alone. They hold regular seminars on topics like wellness and parenting. They host intergenerational activities for kin families in their network, like museum visits and beach days to help build bonds between caregivers and the children they're caring for. And they set up monthly emails for their communities so that they could help connect them to other relevant resources throughout their community. So that is one piece. I'll go to the next slide, please. The next one is a little bit further from what we necessarily think of as being a child welfare or older American program or a kinship program, but it's still really connected here. This is the Victims of Crime Act. So VOCA offers funding to state and local programs that support victims of crime. One of the cool things about this program is that it's not funded through taxpayer dollars. It is funded through fines and penalties that are imposed on individuals and and organizations that are convicted of federal crimes. So what it does is it ensures that people who commit crimes directly contribute to the recovery of their victims. Again, this is used for a pretty wide range of services to help address the physical, emotional, and financial impacts of crime. Things like legal services, mental health services, forensic medical examinations, transitional housing. And similar to CSBG, these funds go out to the states. They are then designated to state administering agencies who then subgrant that to community-based organizations who deliver services directly to families. It is not common, but we have several examples of different agencies across the country that have used these to serve kin. One example of that is a local legal aid program in Georgia that uses VOCA funds to provide free legal representation to kin caregivers. So they use these funds as well as other funds to bring in staff and volunteers who help kin families with different legal arrangements like custody, adoption, guardianship, and also to provide wraparound legal services that support with different needs like housing, with special education, and with accessing public benefits. Next slide, please. And then this one is a little bit further out, but I thought it was a really good example of how funds that are not necessarily thought of as being kinship funds really can be kinship funds. So the 1890 Institution Teaching, Research, and Extension Capacity Building Grants Program, it is a mouthful to say, is a federal program that was meant to support the ability of land-grant institutions to offer quality education and research. It focuses on agricultural and related issues to enhance the quality of life for underrepresented communities. So that does not immediately scream kinship families. And I'll say that unlike the previous two examples, this is a competitive grant program. So eligible universities will apply directly to the US Department of Agriculture for this. And only those universities are eligible to be the recipient, but they often partner with local community organizations to deliver some part of the service, as Anita was speaking to. As I said, these don't normally fund kinship services, but a few years ago, an eligible University received $600,000 to establish a program that focused on grandparents who were raising their grandchildren. These programs, as I said, are supposed to focus on agricultural and related needs. And one of the things that they saw was that grandparents in their community who were raising their grandchildren were at a high risk for different chronic health conditions. So they applied based on that and got funding to create a program that delivered facilitated workshops to grandparents who are raising their grandchildren on things like health literacy, stress management, nutrition, family response to addiction. And on top of those workshops, grandparents that participated in those services, one of the things they offered was case management services and advocacy and support navigating community resources. And the university partnered with other organizations in their community to provide those supports. This was a one-time grant that they received over time, but as Anita was saying, they had a development plan in place, so they were able to figure out how to sustain that funding, and they've parlayed that initial grant that allowed them to create the program into a lasting program that is now delivered statewide. So it was a very exciting use in here. And then I'll go to the next slide. Keith, I can look up the exact name. I don't have it in my notes here right now. It was one of the land grant universities out of West Virginia. So I wanted to talk a little bit about partnerships for federal funding, building off of what Anita shared earlier. There are a lot of federal funding opportunities out there, but most of them are not, or many of them are not things that community-based organizations, especially smaller community-based organizations, can feasibly apply for directly, either because they are not eligible entities or because it is because the grants, a $600,000 grant, not all organizations are able to be eligible for things like that. So the first two examples that I gave before were formula grant programs, where the funds go to a state, territory, or tribe or other jurisdiction that receives the funding, and then it goes to a designated organization that either sometimes delivers service directly, and often ones that subgrant those services out. And those are things like area agencies on aging, or AAAs, community action agencies, or CAAs, state administering agencies, or SAAs, or local education agencies, or LEAs. There are a lot of different three-letter acronyms that are used here. But it behooves community-based organizations that are interested in providing services here to kin to understand which agencies serve as that kind of pass-through for funding and to build relationships there. The other piece is that a lot of this funding is competitive. As we talked about in the example that I gave for the 1890 program, your organization is likely not a land grant university, but could partner with an eligible agency. And I would say, this is a really important strategy, as Anita was saying, for community-based kinship programs. Federal applications for doing things directly are, and the reporting once you receive funding are difficult and onerous, and especially for smaller organizations. And partnering with larger organizations can help build capacity there to serve and ease that burden for you. These are complex programs, so splitting up that piece of work, as we're talking about, are really important. Whether it's because a grant is focused on much larger than kin and you're providing the kin piece, or because it's a grant that's focused on kin and your organization has expertise running peer support programs and you manage that piece of it. Go to next slide. So as I mentioned before, I believe that every issue is a kin issue, and because every issue impacts kin in really unique ways. But not everyone necessarily understands that. So it's our job to help people understand that. And there are a lot of ways to do that. But for many programs, the key is to make yourself known to those intermediary organizations that distribute the federal funds. And by helping those organizations understand the importance of kin, and that kin families are a specialized population to be targeted, you can help increase the likelihood that funds go to kin. So one important strategy for this is that For many of those programs, they are required as part of their applications to engage in different needs assessments and state planning. So those are done at a local level through the three-letter agencies. And it's really important for them figuring out where in the community they need to be prioritized and what services really need to be offered there. They're supposed to often identify what special populations need to target. Kin is one of those. In other cases, they produce the estate plans and they're required to put those out for public comment and public input. And when that happens, that's a really good time to be making sure that they're hearing from you and from many others that kin families are a key target for those services. And by engaging in those processes, you can help ensure that kin families are seen as a vital population. And also that your organization is a go-to when that funding is available. Go to the next slide. So some federal funding, this is about, we want to think about timing for this federal funding. Some federal funding just happens when it happens. Often this is, one-off grant opportunities or different funding opportunities that are created through legislation or federal discretionary funding that is happening. And for those, you kind of just need to keep on the lookout. Anita mentioned a lot of different options for these, but there are a lot of places that you can be looking. The GKS network does a great job of elevating things. If you look to the website today, you'll see a notice at the top of the website that is about funding opportunities from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. You can check, as Anita said, grants.gov, where federal grants and their requirements will be posted. If you have specific work that you are looking for and hoping to receive, you can look at the website of the agency that would manage those things. So if you have an education program you're hoping to find funding for, the Department of Education will post all of their upcoming grant opportunities. And as Anita said with the Child Welfare Information Gateway, many federal agencies have listservs and things that you can sign up for to hear that. For a lot of the sustained funding, though, there are planning cycles that they need to follow. The Community Services Block Grant that I mentioned, the states are required to put forward their plans every 2 years, which means that every 2 years they need to update their community needs assessments. And you can be part of that process. For Older Americans Act funds, states submit a state plan on aging every 4 years, which is required for public comment and public input. And so it's important to know when those cycles are, because if the plan or application that the state, tribe, or territory submits for a specific piece of federal funding doesn't name kin families as a target population, it's much more difficult to get funding. They're able to amend their plans and they're able to get in if it works, but it's much easier if you're able to get in the plan the first time around. And finally, I'll say that this is really a long game. Many of these programs that we're talking about have existed for a long time, and especially in a climate where the pot of funds, of federal funds for human services programs is not expanding. It can be really difficult to break in because federal agencies and intermediary agencies have to make really difficult choices. Choosing to focus a limited supply of funds on kinship families directly means that they're reducing funding elsewhere. So I would say it's never too early to start. The stronger the relationship you have with those intermediaries, the more likely your voice and the voice of the community you're serving will be heard in the process of assessing needs and planning responses. And the stronger the relationships that you have with other organizations in your community, the easier it will be for them to immediately think of you as a partner if they're applying for something that has come forward. And with that, I will pass it over to Tiffany.
Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to present as well alongside Anita and Stephen. For my portion of the presentation, I'm going to actually share information about how to build capacity for smaller nonprofits and those of you who are peer-led nonprofits. But sometimes when you hear the word small, people think different things, right? Some people think that's $2 million, in terms of your budget, $2 million or less, or $1 million or less. But I'm actually referencing, when I say small, a lot of you all who have $200,000 or less, or $50,000 or less a year. because my experience has mostly been with a lot of those grassroots and community-led organizations. So I just want you to know when we use the word small or smaller, I'm also referencing you all who are doing the great work every single day in your communities. But we also wanted to focus on the capacity of small nonprofits today because we want to acknowledge the importance of your voice, the importance of the voice of small nonprofits, peer-led nonprofits, who are often the most connected to the work. You all understand the work and the families in a deeper and a more intimate way, and you have a really important place in decision making. But a lot of you all may not be at the table or even know where the tables are to show up that, are being referenced. So today I want to share some information about how to build your capacity if you feel like you're in that space. So if you are a peer-led or smaller nonprofit, can you let us know in the chat? I see a couple of people that I know who are in the chat, but if you don't mind sharing, if you are one of those smaller ones so we know who's here, please let us know. And I can go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to break down my piece into two sections. We're going to talk first about strategy and planning. So that's more so, how do you want to think about your approach? Like Anita was saying, be strategic. So how are you going to prepare your organization for funding? How are you going to do that planning? And then the second part is going to be about implementation. These are things you can actually do. All right. And after each one of those sections, I'm going to give you actionable tips that you can walk away with because we want to make sure you feel like there's something you can do next. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you all for saying hello in the chat. I see a lot of people I know. All right. So these are the 4 things that you can focus on when you're thinking about how to plan and how to be strategic. The first thing we always need to address first is your mindset. Because a lot of people, when it comes to fundraising, there's a lot of beliefs around, well, there's not enough money, or people don't support small nonprofits, or people don't really like supporting, us, or people don't really understand kinship care, so they're not going to give. And so when you lean into those mindsets that believe that there's not enough, there's always some kind of lack when it comes to funding, it really does impact your thinking. It impacts the actions you take or the actions you don't take. So the first thing we have to understand is that money is abundant and there is enough money to go around. And you may not understand where that money is or how to access it, but we're not going to approach this to say there isn't enough. So that's the first thing we really have to get over. We have to understand there is enough. The second thing I want you to understand with your mindset is that your size does not dictate your impact or your ability to be successful. What do I mean by that? Just because you identify as small or peer-led or other people identify you as small, it doesn't mean that you have less of an impact or you're not as successful. Because every day you see a family, every day you get calls from people who need your help. And what do? You show up for those people. And that is impact, right? And so I need you to understand that your role is so vital and so important. And just because your budget size doesn't necessarily reflect what some people may believe is impactful, doesn't mean that you're not. Okay. So we have to get that out of the way. And I really hope if you have a piece of paper near you, or if you want to even write it in the chat, that you can say, we do make an impact. We are small and mighty. I'm really big on writing things down, so I hope you all can just bear with me with that one. Okay, so let's get to the second one, which is your budget. And I like to tell people to write in the chat. So if you're with me, you can hear me, please say budget, because people are so afraid to write down numbers, or people are so afraid to approach this process. But this is a liberating process. It is a freeing process because it allows you to look at your goals for the year and translate that into numbers. It allows you to see what it really takes to be able to get the work done. It allows you to know how much you need to ask for, how much you need to pursue, and the ways you need to grow. So when I say in the slide how to strategically chart your growth, it can help you chart the path to where you need to go. If you want to be full-time with your nonprofit, you need to know the numbers. You need to know what it takes to get there. So writing out your budget which is basically identifying your goals and then identifying what are the expenses tied to those goals. That's the most simplistic way I can say it. Is a really important step in getting money. All right. Your case statement. Does anybody have a case statement, or have you written a case statement before? If you have not, I really encourage you to do that. A lot of what Anita and Stephen have said are components of that case statement process. And it's basically you writing out a case for why your organization should be funded. It's you taking the time to understand, how can we persuade someone or convince someone that our organization deserves to be funded? So it makes you go through the process of identifying who you serve. What are their biggest needs? What are they struggling with the most? What are their demographics? What are their characteristics? What are the ways you address those needs? What are the outcomes that you hope to impact as a result of the work that you do? And how are you unique? How are you different? How do you stand out? What do you bring to the table? Writing out a case statement, which in a lot of cases, I tell people to do an internal one. There are external ones for certain purposes, but this is a process you do for yourself internally that your board does together for you to outline your case. Because if you're going to ask people for money, then you need to be prepared to make the case for why you should be funded. Okay. And so the other piece of this is also a plan. And you definitely heard Anita say that as well. You need what I call a fundraising plan. Other people call it a development plan. But it is essentially you writing out, okay, I know I need to raise this much money for this year. What are the different strategies we're going to focus on to reach those goals? Are we going to pursue grants this year? Well, how much of our budget is going to be devoted to grants, right? Maybe it's half, right? Maybe that's 25,000. Well, how many grants do you need to write to be able to get to 25,000? You writing this out in numbers forces you to start thinking and actually putting pen to paper to figure out, oh, what's my next step in order to reach that goal? So a plan is just you writing out your strategies, the action steps you need to take within those strategies, and then who is responsible and when will it get done? A plan is not a plan unless it has a deadline. That's just my opinion. So we'll go to the next slide. All right. So here are I wanted to pull out 3 effective ways to raise money. We've talked a lot about government funding, which are really important pieces of a fundraising plan or your fundraising strategies. But here are 3 things you should consider, especially if you're small and if you're pretty new. The first one is called peer-to-peer fundraising. And that is when there are people who advocate for your organization or fundraise on your behalf, right? So I tell people all the time, have you ever participated in a school fundraiser? Have you participated in a race? We had Joe Corby's pizza when I was young, right? Everyone has a child in their family who has hit them up for money. That's peer-to-peer fundraising because the organization is using other people to raise money on the organization's behalf. And so one of the most effective ways when you're really small is to get a group of people, including your board, to ask the people they know, their family, their friends, their coworkers, their associates, to support a cause that's really important to the community. That's one important step. A second thing you should think about is local community-based grants. So we talked a lot about the local government grants, state grants that are available, but you should also be thinking about your community foundation and tapping into their resources. You should be thinking about your local stores, right? So your grocery stores, your banks, your utility companies, most of them have grants associated with their corporations. You should be looking into the grants available through those corporations, and then also corporate support. And the reason why I put corporate support is because you can identify the local companies in your area and build relationships with them. They have employees that may really want to volunteer or want to support your work. They can build a relationship with you through volunteering or you providing presentations to them. Think about ways you can build relationships because at its core, fundraising is just about relationships, right? And it's about you all aligning about what matters most to you. And there are people who work at these corporations who really care about children, who really care about older adults or relatives who have to step up, who probably had that same experience in their life, who would want to help other people too. So think about how you can engage your local corporations and engage their employees. And as a part of that, employee giving is also a part of community support strategies that corporations have. So you need to think about that as well. We'll go to the next slide because I don't want to run over and I feel that I'm talking a lot. So here are some actions you can take for your planning process. Set a goal and write it down. And that seems so simple, but a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people, when you ask them how much money they need, they really struggle to identify you a number, especially with smaller organizations. So ask yourself, what is the goal? What do we need to raise in order to do our work effectively this year? Write that goal down. And then from that goal, begin to start thinking through what are the strategies we need to take to reach that goal. One thing you can also do is just find one strategy that you want to use or you want to learn more. We talked about a lot today. Pick one, right? Learn that, research it, go down the rabbit hole and learn that and figure out how to raise money so you can stay focused, so you don't feel so overwhelmed. And then another really important step you can take if you haven't done it yet is to develop a case statement for your organization. So I'm going to take a few more minutes for the next couple of slides. We can go to the next one to talk about implementation. All right. So these are really important elements you do not want to forsake in your fundraising process. Number one is your board. I need y'all to write that in the chat. You need a board. You really, really do. And this is one of the hardest things to get, a committed and engaged board. Because you can have a board, but it's hard to get people who are committed. It's hard to get people who are engaged. But the more you focus on that, the more you focus on recruiting quality people who understand their roles, who understand that their role is to invest in the organization as well, not just the founder, not just people who volunteer work there, but the people who serve on the board. It's their responsibility to also invest in the organization. They're responsible for the financial health of the organization. They are responsible to fundraise alongside everyone else. So once you get people who understand that, then you can all work together to raise money. The second thing is volunteers. It's really, really easy to get caught up when you're the one running and doing everything for your organization to feel like a one-person show. But really lean into volunteers who can help you execute certain pieces of your fundraising. Really lean into volunteers so you can meet new people, so you can engage with them in an intimate way. You can ask them questions, see what is important to them, what's impactful to them. And people who volunteer are more likely to give to your organization, and they also are a great source for potential board members. Technology, please don't shy away from that. I'm not going to go deep into that, but I will just say two things. The first thing is, if you're just using PayPal or if you're just using Venmo, consider using an online payment donation platform like GiveButter or Zephy or Give Lively. There are a lot of those services. They are designed for nonprofits in order to help you raise money. Most people who create these businesses have done fundraising themselves. So they're designing the technology to make your life easier. So make your life easier and look into those resources. Also, the second thing I want you to think about with technology, and don't throw a tomato at me, but think about AI, artificial intelligence. Think about ChatGPT, which is the most popular one, but it's not the only type of artificial intelligence. But it's great as an idea starter, right? It's great as a companion for brainstorming. It's great for a companion for review and edits and making things more concise, right? So I really do believe in authentic stories. So I don't necessarily believe in using ChatGPT to do everything, to write everything. But I do believe it can help optimize that process. So consider that as well. And then also consistent marketing. You have to be visible. If no one knows you, then they can't fund you. They can't support you. So it is top priority for you to think about all the different ways you can meet new people, that people can learn about your organization, learn about the needs of your participants, learn about why it's so important that kinship care is supported, that kinship caregivers receive the support they need. It's your job as a part of fundraising to educate people about that because people don't know, right? So you can be the one to share that information so they can be compelled to support and become ambassadors for your organization. We'll go to the next slide. And the last thing, I just have a couple more slides, but I just want to highlight again the importance of partnerships for your nonprofits, for those who are small and peer-led. You can be a part, you can play in the sandbox, right? You can partner because you have value. Remember how I said you making an impact? People need you. They need your voice, they need your experience, and they need your perspective. So pursue those partnerships, reach out to those government agencies, reach out to those larger nonprofits, and show up with ideas of how you all can partner together, right? Even larger organizations that submit proposals, they need partners. So I'm going to say over and over again, as Anita and Stephen said, they need you. And never forget that, right? You need partners as well, but don't show up thinking that, they're doing you a favor. You are all in this together. That's what partnership is about. All right. So I'll go to the next slide. I just wanted to leave you all with a few things. If you want to get ready for funding, I know these slides will be available. You can also just take a picture of this, but here's some things you need to consider to be ready. Have a budget for every program that you're running, and then have an overall budget that rolls up all of your programs. That's really important for you to have. Almost every grant is going to ask you for that. Have a write-up of your program, the program goals, your program activities, who's responsible for those activities, and the outcomes that you hope to impact. If you have a strategic plan, make sure you have a copy of that ready. If you don't have a full strategic plan, at least have a one-year plan with goals and activities or actions that are going to help you reach those goals for that year, okay? Get used to producing financial statements like your balance sheet or your statement of activities, because grants will ask you for that, right? RFPs will request that information. So you want to have that handy and not be scrambling the day that the grant is due, trying to figure out on Google how to create a financial statement. But also make sure you are submitting your 990 forms regularly and have a copy of that ready to submit. Other documentation like your certificate of formation, your 501c3 letter, your bylaws, your board policies, just make sure you have all that stuff organized and together, okay? And then capability statements. So statements about your organization's strengths, what your capabilities are, about particular staff members or volunteers or people who will be doing part of the work. Make sure you have that written up already for your grants. A list of your board, and then make sure you all have registered for charitable solicitation. So in 40 of the states, you're required to register to get charitable donations, which also includes grants. So if a foundation is in that area, you may be required to register and pay a fee. So just be mindful of that. And I'll go to my last slide. Here's some actions you can take. If you feel like, oh, this is great information, but what do I do next? Here are some options. Create a checklist for yourself. So that slide that I just had with the 501c3 letter and the strategic plan, create your own checklist for yourself and then start checking off the things to make sure you have everything that you need. One great thing you can do is ask your board to commit to giving. I venture to say that for a lot of you, 100% of your board members are not donating to your organization. I'm just going to take a wild guess. And I understand the hesitation with that, right? But at some level, every board member should commit to investing their money in the organization. If you're working with people with lived experience, $5 can mean a lot to them. That's significant. That's meaningful for them. And a lot of people want to give, right? So just make sure you go to your board and have that real conversation about the importance of them also investing in the organization. And one more thing you can do is to set up a folder. This is really easy, y'all. Set up a folder that houses important documents so you can be organized. And when it's time to submit or have a partnership, you can easily find the information that you need. Thank you all for today. I'm going to turn it back over to Anna.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And I couldn't agree with you more that small and mighty. I mean, that these small nonprofits over and over for the 25 years I've been doing this are the ones that the families trust, that are really helping the most, and that, the larger government agencies and nonprofits really need to be mindful about partnering with you. I just couldn't agree more. Thank you, Tiffany. On the next slide, you'll see that Tiffany has been working with 4 community, mostly peer-led organizations for us, and they have been learning a lot together. And Tiffany is going to generate some lessons learned from that process in writing that we will share on our website. Stephen is also in the process of creating a federal funding primer. So he'll have a lot of these funding sources that he talked about today, in addition to many, many others, because as he said, a lot of times we just think of it as like the binary choice of child welfare or aging, and there are just so many other funding sources out there, and we have to think creatively in this space. So thank you, all 3 of you, so much for today's presentation. And I'm pleased now to turn it over to everyone for questions. We've gotten some good questions in the chat, some really great engagement in the chat. I hope you all have seen it. You, Steve, Tiffany, and Anita. I will kick the first question over to you, Tiffany, which we got prior to the webinar, which is that when people are looking for new board members and they want those board members to help with fundraising, and I'm sure make their own donation too, like you were talking about, what characteristics, what experience should people look for?
This was a great question. So it's going to be layered. But the first thing I'll say is most people who serve on boards, even if they have some experience on a board, are uncomfortable with fundraising. So most people don't show up ready or willing to do that work. So it takes you learning together. It's personal development. It's training for everyone. It's an understanding of what your messaging is and what you want to focus on for fundraising. But you want people who are willing to give up their networks, who are willing to ask people that they know, who are willing to introduce you to people. So if you're trying to be strategic and you want to work with certain foundations, you may want to look at people who have engaged with certain foundations or former board members of that. Like, you want to create your wish list of what you need and the kind of funding you need, and people who may have experience in that or who are willing to open up doors for you in those ways. So it's not like a easy answer, but I'll just say people who are really willing to ask and people who are willing to share their networks with you and with the organization.
That makes good sense, Tiffany. I know the boards I've sat on, I have not gone to all eager to fundraise, but you do what you got to do, and you need to look for those people who are willing to do that. Anita, do you have anything to add there?
I want to add to what Tiffany said. What's worked well for me for the smaller nonprofits, they have 2 boards. They have a funding board that's just made of people who have money or access to people. And so they don't have to meet on a regular basis about the day-to-day operations. And then they have the regular board who are really involved in the trenches and about dedicated to the content and what you do. And that's really made a big difference. For instance, I had a mainline mavens. These were really, really rich people who loved about child abuse, and they raised 150,000, and they just had their own little network, and then they gave the money to the nonprofit. So it doesn't always have to be a quote, a board, but you can have an entity that is attached to you.
Good point. Yeah, I served on a fundraising committee as part of a nonprofit. Stephen, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just say, if your organization is, especially if you're a smaller organization and you're interested in trying to apply directly for federal grants, someone who has experience with those, directly applying for federal grants is its own monster. And so having someone who has experience with managing that onerous application process and setting up the kind of reporting and data requirements that you need for that could be really helpful to have there.
Good point. Thank you, Stephen. And I want to point out to everybody that I typed while Tiffany was writing give butter in the chat only because I didn't catch the other names, Tiffany. And I figured if people like me can't, so if you could add those other names in there too. And you will see as well, Tiffany, that some people are asking about MailChimp too. So if you have anything to add there in the chat, I think we could address those there. Stephen, I want to ask you now, how do you advocate for, those families that are not involved with child welfare, those kinship families that don't even come to the attention of child welfare, which we all know is a majority of families? How do you advocate for funding for them? Like, how do you make the case?
So I'd say on a federal level, this is where kind of focusing on some of those needs assessments that need to happen, especially for the funding that is trickling down through state agencies and to local intermediary agencies. That needs assessment is really the process by which they're supposed to understand who are specific populations that need extra support. I would say for us, for people who are working in this space, kinship caregivers, informal kinship caregivers caring for children who aren't in the custody of the child welfare system, are very clearly a population that both deserves and needs support. But for people who are not working in the space, they don't necessarily realize that. They don't realize the degree to which that is happening. I will say, I was speaking with my mother about this. She has no connection at all to child welfare work and was baffled by the knowledge that, for every child being raised by kin in the system, there are 18 or 19 being raised by kin outside of the system. Those aren't, people who aren't in this space don't realize that and don't realize that there aren't the same supports that are available. So being part of those needs assessments is really important, because if we aren't in the rooms where decisions about funding for, say, the substance use prevention, treatment, and recovery services block grant are being made, the people who are making those decisions are not going to know the size of the kinship population, and they're not going to know that informal kinship families have borne the brunt of the opioid epidemic that those funds are meant to serve, and they won't know that if they are really trying to address those underlying issues there that are caused by the opioid epidemic, they need to be focusing on kid families. That's not something that people necessarily know unless they're in this space. But if we can get in there early, if we can help during those needs assessments and make the case that kinship families are really a target population that deserves a unique focus, then we can kind of shift those funds and make that really important point and shift funding that way. I think outside of funds that are dedicated for the child welfare system, it's much more difficult to get dedicated child welfare system funds for those informal kin families, but the ones that are meant on community services and more broadly, I think that's a really important case to make, and we can get in our for that.
And it's true that just simple strategies like mentioning these families and their needs, and like, say, consolidated action plans with respect to housing at the local level can just go a long way, right? So trying to get the families elevated through all these, like you point out, needs assessments or community plans. Yeah, thank you, Stephen. We had a requester who would like to learn more about extra funding for kinship basic needs support. Anita, do you have thoughts around that?
I kind of want to build on what Stephen had said earlier about VOCA. For instance, there's an agency in Philadelphia, and it builds on the youth violence. It builds on violence prevention. It builds on the escalation of murders and whatever. And they funded a kinship care agency who works with mothers who have lost their children to violence. And so VOCA in Pennsylvania gave them money. So it's all those kind of things that we don't think about. But these are mothers and grandmothers who are taking care of children, again, because of their son or daughter, they were murdered. And so that's all the other possibilities in terms of clearly the Public Welfare Foundation is a good initiative for families who are interested. Also the others of you mentioned the community foundations. And when I work with community foundations, I go to the community foundation, and oftentimes we develop the RFP with them, as opposed to letting it come down from them. And when you're in a collaborative approach with your foundation, it makes all the difference in the world. And then in the toolkit, there's a listing of some foundations and in areas that would be very helpful in terms of raising money. And one more thing, right now, the other thing that's really hot for all of you, for foundations and for fundraising, is school-based wellness programs. And it's coming from the federal grants down to the state. And then the states send it down to the school districts. And their focus is on behavioral health and medical, but also children who don't have access to services in their community. And this clearly is a kinship care focus.
Thank you so much, Anita. And we need to wrap up now. So we didn't get to all the questions, but I do encourage you all to go onto the homepage of our website and just click on that form in the upper right-hand corner, and we'll make sure these questions get to the right people. Or, just email us and we will make sure that they get answered. But you will get all these slides. You will get the recording by the end of the week, some of the resources that we shared in the chat. We would love to get your feedback about today's webinar, and Mari is going to drop in the chat, one of our staffers, a short survey that we would love for you to take. I'm going to share here on the screen our next webinar, which is July 16, and that one's going to focus on respite services for the families. And just please stay connected. Please bookmark our website. We're constantly putting new resources on there. And we just thank you for participating today and connecting with the network. And please stay in touch and ask us anything at any point. So thank you to our presenters very much. There's been great commentary through the chat. So I hope you all saw that, because we're very appreciative to you, Stephen, Anita, and Tiffany. Thank you very much. And hope to see you on the 16th.